The charity gala at the museum was winding down in the way those things always do. Lights softened, voices lowered, waitstaff moving like they were trying not to disturb the art. The last bids were closing out at the silent auction tables, and the room smelled like champagne that had been sitting too long in warm flutes. Lily leaned into me as if we were still a unit, still a couple people assumed made sense. Her heels clicked when she shifted her weight, and I felt that familiar little sway that told me she'd had more than she should have. Somebody behind us laughed at a joke I didn't catch. A donor couple floated by, smiling too hard. The museum's marble floor held the cold like a grudge. Lily lifted her chin and laughed, too loud, too sharp for the quiet hall, and then she said it like she was brushing lint off my sleeve. Relax, it was just one night, with Megan's husband. A few heads turned. Not fully, not openly. Just enough. The kind of glance people do when they want to see without being caught seeing. Lily didn't notice. She caught herself on the edge of the auction table, fingers sliding against the laminated bid sheets, and smiled like she'd said something mildly embarrassing, like a joke that landed wrong. I stood there with my hands still resting at the small of her back, and I didn't feel shock. I felt finality, like a door that had already closed, and I'd only just heard the latch click. I looked at the table numbers, the little display cards, the neat rows of silent bids, people paying for the privilege of looking generous, and my mind did something calm and automatic. It took the sentence apart. One night. Megan's husband. Not a rumor. Not a suspicion. Not a feeling I could argue with myself about later. An admission. And in that moment, I didn't think about yelling. I didn't think about confronting her in a room full of donors and polished smiles. I just knew, quietly, completely, that something had crossed a line you don't walk back from. And I kept my face neutral, because I understood something else too. The night wasn't over yet. Neither was the damage. Before that night, our life in Austin looked solid in the way people mean when they say it out loud. Not exciting, not fragile, just stable. Predictable in a way that felt earned. We had 3 kids who moved through the house like a system. School schedules, sports bags by the door, lunches packed the night before when mornings ran tight. Sundays were slow by design. Breakfast at home. Sometimes pancakes if no one had early plans. Sometimes just eggs and coffee while the kids argued about nothing that mattered. I'm Ethan. I work as an engineer, the kind of job where problems come with documentation and outcomes are measured in tolerances and timelines. Lily is an interior designer. She has an eye for things I don't notice. Light angles, textures, how a room can make you feel settled or restless without saying why. For a long time, I admired that difference. It felt complimentary, like we covered each other's blind spots. Her drinking never registered as a crisis to me. She didn't drink every day. It wasn't hidden. It showed up mostly at events, openings, dinners with clients, nights she framed as stress relief. A glass became 2. 2 became a looseness I sometimes mistook for confidence. When she laughed louder or got sharper with her words, I told myself it was exhaustion, creative burnout, pressure to perform. I'd seen it in my own field, different surface, same strain. There were signs. I see that now without dramatizing it. Strange jokes that landed sideways. Comments that felt defensive before I'd even asked anything. Late-night messages, she tilted her phone away from out of habit, not secrecy. At least that's how I categorized it. Mood shifts that reset by morning, like nothing had happened. I filed it all under temporary. A season. Something we'd outworked together. Ryan and Megan were part of our orbit. Barbecues. Birthdays. Group texts about school events. Their marriage looked functional, which is to say it looked like most marriages that aren't actively falling apart in public. When Ryan's name came up more often in Lily's stories, projects overlapping, advice shared, I didn't interrogate it. Designers collaborate. People cross professional paths. I had no interest in becoming suspicious just to prove I was paying attention. We planned trips. We talked about renovations we might never do. We argued about small things the way couples do when the foundation feels reliable enough to absorb it. From the outside, nothing about us suggested instability. And from the inside, I chose explanations that preserved the version of our life I believed in. I wasn't avoiding reality. I was interpreting it in the most generous way available. At the time, that felt like trust. Later, I understood it differently. After the museum, I didn't say anything that night. Not in the car. Not while she kicked off her shoes by the door. Not when she went straight to the bathroom, and turned on the sink to drown out the silence. I stood in the kitchen and rinsed 2 glasses that didn't need rinsing, listening to the house settle the way it always did after midnight. The sentence stayed with me, intact. It didn't blur or soften the way uncomfortable moments usually do when sleep gets involved. I replayed it without emotion, like a line of code you keep running because the output doesn't make sense yet. Just one night. Megan's husband. I didn't try to decode her tone or assign intent. I didn't wonder if she meant it metaphorically or exaggerated for effect. I didn't tell myself she was drunk enough to be unreliable. I simply let the words exist exactly as they were said. Over the next few days, I noticed something change, not in her behavior, but in my interpretation of it. The details I used to smooth over stopped dissolving on contact. They stayed put. When Ryan's name came up and Lily answered too quickly, I didn't counterbalance it with trust. I just noted the speed. When she bristled at simple questions about scheduling or travel, I didn't adjust my tone to calm things down. I registered the defensiveness and moved on. There was a shift inside me that didn't announce itself. No anger spike. No urge to confront. It felt more like a system reboot. Old assumptions cleared out. New information began to sort itself without resistance. Late messages I used to ignore became data points. Last-minute work trips that once sounded inconvenient now sounded vague. Her phone always faced down on the counter. Her stories arrived pre-defended, explanations stacked before curiosity could even surface. I didn't accuse her. I didn't check her phone or dig through drawers. I didn't need to. The pattern didn't require proof yet. It only required attention. What surprised me most was how quiet my mind became. I wasn't running arguments or rehearsing conversations. I wasn't planning how to fix anything. I stopped trying to preserve the version of us I'd been maintaining alone. For the first time, I let the possibility stand without rushing to contain it. She noticed something was different. She asked if I was tired. I said I'd had a long week. That was true, just not in the way she meant. I realized then that denial hadn't been love. It had been effort. And effort has a sound when it stops. From that point on, I wasn't reacting to Lily. I was watching her. Not suspiciously. Not cruelly. Accurately. And once I started seeing clearly, there was no incentive to unsee it. That night, after the gala, I didn't try to fix anything. I didn't try to calm her or steer the conversation into familiar territory. I just listened to the quiet churn of the house while she stumbled up the stairs. I caught the echo of her footsteps in the hallway, matching the rhythm I imagine any persons would have when they don't want to feel the distance they're creating. I stood in the living room with my phone in hand, not out of suspicion, but out of a clinical kind of patience. I hit the record button on a voice memo app, not to trap her, not to expose her, not to wield it like a weapon, but because I finally understood I needed an unbiased witness. Not an advocate, not an imagined defense, just facts. If you've made it this far, this story clearly caught your attention. If you're enjoying it, drop a like on the video. It helps me see what kind of stories you want more of next. Let's keep going. Minutes later, she padded into the kitchen, exhausted and unsteady, and said something that sounded like a script she didn't mean to rehearse. Just one night. Okay, maybe more. Who counts? She said, half drunk, shoulder leaning against the counter. I didn't interrupt her. I didn't raise my voice. I just recorded. Her words were clear, not slurred, not poetic, just admissions in a tone that didn't want absolution. It wasn't dramatic. There were no raised fists or tears. It was merely the understatement of something vast. Later, when I listened to that recording, I didn't hear betrayal amplified. I heard clarity. The same way a chart makes sense only once plotted, this recording gave shape to what had been guessing before. The shift in me wasn't instantaneous. It was subtle and mechanical, like a fuse finally burning through after being soaked. I woke up with the same routine the next morning. Coffee brewed. Kids off to school. Emails sent. Nothing about the world had exploded, but everything that I'd been explaining away inside my own head had stopped being explanations. I didn't confront her with it that day. I didn't accuse her or demand apologies. I didn't need a confession because I already had one. I just stopped anticipating the version of us I wanted to be real. There was something painfully simple about that moment of internal decision. I didn't leave the house. I didn't throw plates. I didn't storm around angrily. I just understood that I was done trying to repair what wasn't broken in the way I had convinced myself for years. I put the phone down. I walked into the bathroom. I brushed my teeth the way I always had. My reflection didn't look sad or angry. It just looked different. I had stopped editing my interpretation of reality to make it easier to swallow. And once I crossed that internal breakpoint, everything that came after was just observation instead of hopeful reconstruction. In the days that followed, I didn't confront Lily. I didn't reference the recording or repeat her words back to her. I shifted into something quieter. I observed, not with bitterness, not with urgency, just with attention. The way you watch a structure after you realize the crack isn't cosmetic. She remembered almost nothing from the gala. At least that's what she said. She laughed it off, blamed the wine, blamed the stress, blamed the noise of the night. I didn't challenge her version. I let it exist alongside the facts I was collecting. Ryan stopped showing up to anything that involved both families. Barbecues got rescheduled. Group texts went unanswered. When his name came up, it landed in the room like something dropped and ignored. Megan texted Lily twice that week. Both messages stayed unread. I noticed because Lily usually prided herself on being responsive. Now there were gaps. I didn't fill them in. I let them widen. I started paying attention to timestamps. The way her stories lined up against calendar entries. The way business trips blurred into weekends with no receipts attached. I didn't ask for details. I just noted what didn't volunteer itself anymore. One afternoon, while backing up photos for a client, Lily synced her phone to our shared cloud by mistake. She didn't mention it. Probably didn't notice. I didn't say anything either. I waited until she left for a site visit and opened the folder like I was checking the weather. There were hotel rooms. Not obvious ones. Neutral walls. Different mirrors. The same lighting. Photos taken weeks apart that shared too many angles to be coincidence. A lamp. A headboard. A window view that repeated itself with slight variations. Enough consistency to stop being accidental. I didn't react. I closed the folder and let it sit. Evidence has a way of organizing itself if you don't rush it. At dinner, Lily talked about projects that didn't exist. Clients that never called. Stress she wanted sympathy for. I nodded when appropriate. Asked nothing that required a lie in response. The house stayed calm. The kids stayed unaware. Routine held. What surprised me wasn't how much there was to find. It was how little I needed to look. Once I stopped explaining things away, the truth stopped hiding. It didn't need pressure. It didn't need confrontation. It surfaced naturally, like debris when the water finally settles. I wasn't building a case out of anger. I was letting reality finish its sentence. And the more I listened, the clearer it became that nothing about this was sudden or isolated. It was structured, repeated, maintained. I didn't rush the moment of exposure. I let the facts stack themselves neatly, one on top of the other. Because by then, I understood something important. The truth doesn't need to be chased. It only needs to be observed long enough to stop pretending it's something else. What shifted next wasn't emotional. It was procedural. Once I understood the scope, I stopped treating it as a private collapse and started treating it like exposure with shared consequences. Lily's choices hadn't stayed contained. They had crossed into other people's lives, finances, and obligations. Ignoring that would have been another form of denial. I reached out to Megan without accusations. No confrontation. No dramatics. I asked if we could talk and told her I had information that affected both of us. She agreed, cautious but composed, the way someone does when they already suspect the ground isn't solid. We met during the day, in a public place, nothing hidden. I told her exactly what I knew and how I knew it. I didn't editorialize. I didn't soften it either. I gave her dates, patterns, and context, and then I stopped talking. Megan didn't cry. She thanked me and said she needed to check something for herself. That was the last time I involved myself emotionally in that thread. A few days later, she called back. Ryan's phone told the rest of the story. Messages, meetups, confirmations that matched what I had already seen from the other side. The overlap wasn't accidental. It was deliberate and sustained. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Megan asked if I knew anything about a loan. I didn't. At least, not yet. She forwarded documents Ryan had signed months earlier. My name wasn't on them. Lily's was. The collateral wasn't Ryan's. It was ours. A startup. Vague language. Optimistic projections. Shared assets listed casually, like they belonged to no one in particular. I pulled our financial records and found the same signatures, the same dates. I hadn't noticed because the amounts were structured to look ordinary. What had started as betrayal moved cleanly into liability. I contacted an attorney and handed over everything I had without commentary. Recordings, photos, financials, timelines. I didn't ask what it meant emotionally. I asked what it meant legally. The answer was simple and unsettling. This wasn't just a marriage ending. It was exposure that required documentation, separation, and protection. I didn't confront Lily about the loan. I didn't need to. The paper trail spoke clearly without my involvement. The moment I stopped treating it as something personal, it became manageable. That's the part people misunderstand. You don't escalate when you see the full picture. You stabilize. Because once money and shared responsibility are involved, feelings stop being relevant. Only records matter. And the records were finally complete. We didn't plan a confrontation. There was no coordinated meeting or dramatic setting. It unfolded the way most consequences do, around other people, in daylight, without permission. A family barbecue at Megan and Ryan's place, something that had been on the calendar long before the truth had settled into place. I showed up because the kids expected it. Lily came because pretending nothing had changed was still her reflex. Megan stood near the grill, calm in a way that felt deliberate. Ryan hovered, avoiding eye contact, already rehearsing explanations he hadn't been asked for yet. The sentence that broke the stalemate didn't come from me. Megan looked at Ryan and said, evenly, "I know about the hotel. And the loan." Nothing else followed it. No raised voice. No accusations layered on top. Just that. Ryan started talking immediately, not denying it, explaining it. Stress. Opportunity. Bad timing. Words that tried to soften intent without ever retracting it. He talked as if context might substitute for responsibility. Lily reacted differently. She went defensive, then fragile. Alcohol. Emotional exhaustion. A rough period. She looked at me like she was waiting for something. Anger, interruption, a signal that I was still part of the argument. I didn't give her one. I stood there holding a paper plate with food I hadn't touched and let the conversation pass through the space I used to occupy. I didn't step in to correct details or defend myself. I didn't validate anyone's version. I simply didn't return to my old role. That absence did more than any confrontation could have. Ryan kept talking until he realized no one was engaging with his reasoning. Megan didn't argue back. She just listened, absorbing confirmation she no longer needed. Lily tried to redirect, to pull me in, to anchor herself to familiarity. I stayed still. At some point, Lily said my name. Not loudly, not softly, just enough to test whether it still worked. I looked at her and said nothing. The conversation ended on its own. Not cleanly, not dramatically. It simply ran out of energy once no one was feeding it. Later, people would describe that day differently. Some would say it was awkward. Others would say it was tense. A few would exaggerate it into something louder than it was. From my perspective, it was precise. I didn't win an argument. I didn't expose anyone publicly. I just stopped participating in a system that required my silence to function. And once I stepped out of it, the structure couldn't support itself anymore. After that day, things moved on their own. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with the kind of momentum that doesn't require pushing once gravity takes over. I didn't file anything out of spite or make calls meant to force outcomes. I followed procedures. I signed where my attorney told me to sign. I stopped sharing space where separation was advised. The rest unfolded without my involvement. The divorce filings came first. Standard language. No commentary. Documentation attached where necessary. Lily reacted the way people often do when they realize events are no longer reversible. She oscillated between remorse and anger, sometimes within the same hour. I stayed consistent, calm, unresponsive to emotional appeals that arrived too late to matter. Word traveled faster than I expected. Not gossip, exactly, just context filling in where silence used to be. Lily lost clients quietly. Projects were paused. Referrals dried up. People don't like uncertainty attached to their investments, and reputation is a form of collateral no one notices until it's gone. Her drinking escalated once there was no one left to moderate it. I didn't document that out of judgment. I documented it because I had children to protect. Late nights turned into missed mornings. Promises slipped. Patterns formed. The arrest happened on a weekday. Mid-afternoon. She was pulled over less than a mile from the house. No one was hurt. That mattered. The report was factual and unemotional. Numbers, times, location. Another document added to a growing file that didn't require interpretation. Court didn't care about feelings. It cared about consistency, records, stability. Who showed up on time? Who followed instructions? Who didn't make excuses when accountability was expected? I received primary custody without argument, not because I demanded it, but because the evidence didn't support any alternative. The house stayed with me under the settlement. Assets were divided cleanly. The loan was neutralized through legal channels before it could cause further damage. I didn't celebrate any of it. There was no sense of victory, just resolution. A series of outcomes aligned with facts instead of narratives. Lily entered treatment later. I heard that secondhand. I didn't comment. Her recovery wasn't my responsibility anymore. My responsibility had narrowed, clarified, and become manageable. People sometimes assume these situations end with a decisive moment, a final confrontation, or a speech. They don't. They end with paperwork processed correctly and routines reestablished without chaos. I didn't force consequences. I stepped out of the way and let them arrive. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. There was no sense of balance restored, no internal scoreboard leveling out. What settled in instead was quiet. The kind that arrives after machinery shuts down and you realize how much noise you'd been living with without noticing. People tried to frame it for me. Friends said I was strong. Others said I was patient. A few implied I'd played it well. I didn't correct them, but none of those explanations fit. Strength suggests effort. Strategy suggests intent. What I felt was absence of tension, of vigilance, of the need to interpret someone else's behavior for signs of safety. The phrase Lily had used at the museum came back to me more than once. Just one night. It turned out to be the smallest lie in the entire story. Not because of quantity, but because of function. It was the opening offer, the one meant to limit damage before anyone understood the scope. I didn't spend time disproving it. I didn't collect witnesses or argue timelines. I didn't persuade anyone of my version. I stepped out, and in doing so, let the truth stand without my endorsement. That's the part people don't expect. They think resolution comes from proving something, from being believed, from having the last word. But resolution, real resolution, comes from refusing to keep negotiating reality. I didn't need apologies once I understood the pattern. I didn't need explanations once the facts were aligned. I didn't need to be right in the eyes of anyone who mattered, because the outcome spoke clearly on their own. The marriage ended without ceremony. Papers filed. Names separated. Systems disentangled. What remained was ordinary life, stripped of tension but not of responsibility. I learned something uncomfortable in that process. Not about betrayal, but about participation. How much energy it takes to hold something together that no longer wants to be whole. How easy it is to confuse endurance with loyalty. I didn't reclaim myself through confrontation or closure. I reclaimed myself by leaving the argument entirely. And once I did, there was nothing left to defend. One morning I packed the kids' lunches alone. The kitchen light was still dim, the house quiet in that early space before the day makes demands. We used to do this together, Lily and I, moving around each other without talking, passing bread, knives, notes. The motions were the same. The person doing them wasn't. I spread peanut butter, cut apples, sealed bags. Ordinary tasks. No symbolism attached. The kids drifted in one by one, half awake, asking the same questions they always had. Nothing in their world had collapsed overnight. That mattered more than anything else. After they left, I stood at the sink a moment longer than necessary and noticed how steady everything felt. Not happy, not sad, just clear. There was no argument waiting to be finished, no story left to correct. Life had narrowed to what was directly in front of me, and that was enough. People ask if I do anything differently. I don't answer that anymore. The question assumes control where there wasn't any. I didn't end the marriage with a speech or a revelation. I ended it by stepping out and not returning. Life didn't stop. It adjusted. And in that adjustment, I found something simple and durable. Peace that doesn't need witnesses. That's the end of this story. If you made it all the way here, consider subscribing to stay with us. I've placed a couple of recommended videos on screen for you. Pick one and keep watching. I'll see you in the next story.